Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Buddhist Biohacker. Buddhist Biohacker is creating conscious content for 1111D, and I am your host, Lisa Gunshore, and I'm really excited because we have Barrie Risman here with us again. Welcome back, Barrie.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Oh, I'm so happy to have you back, and welcome to everybody who's joining in the live feed. And I just have a few things to share here at the beginning. So first off, we've been doing something called the monthly download. And we've only done, this is like month number 2, so this is brand new, but we are going to continue this into 2021 with a monthly guest every month. And so just so everybody knows who is new to our community, or even if you've been in the community and you aren't sure what the monthly download is, as a spiritual teacher myself, I feel that we've had so many great resources, so many great teachers and healers on the show, but an hour really isn't enough to dive into some of the body of work that each guest has. And so the monthly download, the intention behind it is integration. It's really for you to be able to see everything that the guest has to offer, their body of work, their YouTube channel if they have one, their classes, their books, their websites, like everything that has to do with their platform. Good morning, Jackie, welcome. And so that's what the monthly download is. And then at the end of the month, which is coming up tomorrow, but we're right here at the end, then we have our monthly download guest, which this month was Barrie, on the show so that you can ask some questions and really connect in with them after you've really looked through their body of work. So that's what the monthly download is. And we will take a break in November and December, and then we'll be back in January. So Christian Strang will be our monthly download for October. So just so everybody knows. And then next year we'll kick it off in January, fresh and new again. So that is what that's all about. And Barrie and I were talking before we went live about integration and this very thing, which is, you know, we're in these challenging times where it feels like, you know what I think of, Barrie, the image that comes in my head right now, so thank you, Spirit, is those fun houses at the carnivals where you're trying to stand and the ground goes back and forth and you're trying to walk and you can't quite do that. That's the image that they're showing me right now. And that is totally how it feels. It's like you're trying to stay balanced and trying to get through, but everything around you is like moving and shifting and swirling and turning and moving around. And so what we were just talking about was, what do we do? And I think the refinement of spiritual practice, the integration is so important. And that's what you do. So I'm going to kick it to you for a minute.
Well, thank you for having me. And thanks for everyone that's joining us live or watching the recording. We're happy to have you here. I'm happy to have you here. And Lisa, I'm really glad you brought up the word integration right at the beginning, because that is, you know, one of the reasons that I wrote Evolving Your Yoga, because, well, I wrote the book, you know, from 2016 to it came out in 2019. So I could not have had any idea of what we would be living through or how we might be using our yoga practice or our other spiritual practices that we do right now. But I think one thing that's become clear for me and the teachers that I work with over the last 6 months is that what's needed now is integration, meaning walking the talk, you know, bringing what you do on your mat to serve you in your life. And so in a way, while you know, I totally love that image of being in the fun house where the ground beneath you feels shaky. And when you said that, I was also thinking of the mirrors, the distorted mirrors that you look in, and you're not able to see yourself clearly, you know. And there's so many ways now that I think what is reality, you know, just there's so many questions about things we took for granted or thought were so fundamental in our lives on so many levels. These things are coming into question. So for me, one thing that's become crystal clear is like, what doesn't change when everything else around us changes, right? And how do we, hi, Michelle, nice to have you here. How do we use our practice to hold steady, to anchor into a ground of being within us that doesn't change when everything else is changing. And so yoga practice, like I've been talking to friends, and I'm an alignment-based teacher. Mm-hmm. And, what's become clear over the past 6 months is like what's really important in our yoga practice. Like so many people have said to me, like, I don't care about alignment anymore. Like, who cares? Which way the skin of my inner ankle is moving, blah, 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 and, of course, there is a place and a value for that. But I think what I mean when I say that is like what yoga's always been about is about the integration. It is about what we do in yoga, what we consider practice, is meant to shift the way we experience ourselves, the way we see life, our perspective, our understanding. Like that is what yoga has always been about. And now it's like, now we have no choice. Now it's super clear. We must be, just to navigate this everyday upside down funhouse reality we're in, what do we hold on to? What do we hold true? And so it doesn't have so much to do with anything frivolous in the practice, right? It has to do with really it's connection. People are coming to yoga because they just want human connection. They want to breathe. They want to feel a sense of themselves that again is this unchanging sense of who we are. So I love that you are bringing up this idea of integration, because I think it's what has always been so important about yoga, and what gets a little bit lost sometimes in the mainstream realm of practice. We are not in a typical yoga class. We are not often educated about how to bring the gifts of practice into our life in a real way. And now we're all doing that for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, it's so true. And hi, Sarah. It's good to see you.
Hi, Sarah. Hi, Jackie.
Yeah, all these great people. I love it. Yeah, and what you're saying, gosh, you make me think of the role of shavasana at the end of a practice. And for me, the stimulation of the world and my psychic abilities has always been an overwhelming thing for me. And so my practice in yoga has always been to get to that, to move my body and work the energy to a place where when I lay down in a shavasana, it's clear space and I can actually just sit with myself. And so you're making me think of that, because what an important and valuable thing right now for all of us to have, because we are being bombarded. If you allow in the external feedback, we are being bombarded in all different directions with all sorts of narratives. And I think the only way to have true discernment is through your practice of yoga, meditation, getting to that clear space where you can think and discern for yourself what is true and what is in alignment with source. I mean, that's going to be, there's a lot of discussion right now on a lot of different channels about discernment, but it's getting to a place to have discernment that's even the more important piece, I think. And that's where the refinement of the spiritual practices, and that's what part of what we were talking about before we went live, and for everybody to have context, is the collective that I work with continues to like drive home. Do not be distracted by the events of the world. Stay focused on refining your spiritual practices and this integration piece. And so, how do we use these practices? And you're right, like yoga, the idea of yoga and meditation, these practices are like essential now, like way more than they were 6 months ago. Like you have to have a practice or you're going to fly all around in that fun house. It's the yoga, being able to stay strong and balanced in the rocks and the waves is like what it's all about, I think.
Yeah, we need practices that help us become quiet, because that's where I think the discernment comes from, where we can let go of the outer and even the internal noise, and just come back to a sense of quiet. I think that's why the class this week that you're going to take, my weekly classes, we're focusing on pranayama and pratyahara and restorative yoga, so breath work. Pratyahara is the practice of withdrawal of the senses. In yoga, there's a beautiful metaphor that the senses are like the senses are like bees that follow the queen bee of the mind, that where the mind goes, the senses follow, and everything gets drawn inside. And for me, Shavasana is a practice of that, right? It's just letting go of anything external to us, which yoga considers even our minds and our bodies as temporary and always changing, are somewhat external to the core of who we truly are, and just letting go of all. That's why Shavasana is called the corpse pose, right? It's about letting go, about allowing that to dissolve temporarily and just sitting in that space of quiet, which, it's not a luxury anymore. Like, we really need it just to keep our feet on the ground, as you say. So that's why, restorative yoga poses, and restorative yoga doesn't always have to be propped still, lying around. It can be movement, it can be releasing, but anything to let go of kind of the noise that our nervous systems are absorbing every moment of every day right now. Again, these practices are not just a nice thing we do for ourselves. I think they are really part of what will keep us going, is taking time every day to become a little bit quiet.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I wonder too, like, the nervous system. I mean, that's our nervous systems are getting blown out right now. I mean, that's what I feel between the anxiousness and the frenetic energy. We've had experiences in our house where we've broken dishes, we had electrical issues with the car, our microwave blew out. I mean, there's a lot of telekinetic energy happening right now because the planet's vibration is changing. So the Schumann resonance, which I track, has been up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down. And then you also have all the electronics, right? So everybody's scrolling, everybody's reading, everybody's wondering. I wonder every day, like, okay, what's going to happen now kind of thing. So it's like, there's this very frenetic, like, tense energy. So I want to ask you, or have you talk a little bit more about the restorative yin kind of practices, or what you can recommend, because I think that's, in fact, I was just talking to a client yesterday about doing that very thing, and he'd never done yoga before. So I was trying to explain, well, you kind of need to find some restorative or yin kind of practices, and you can't just go to a studio right now either. So like, what are your thoughts about, I know you just brought it up and it's making me think, like, we really have to support our nervous system.
Yeah. Well, I think it's actually a combination of movement and stillness that we're all going to need some combination of vigorous movement balanced with quiet inward practices, because there are just some days where we just need to blow some energy and move around. So movement is really critical. Mm-hmm. And then there will be times where we just need to go in, to close our eyes, put a blanket over us, get in a quiet, dark place where we can be for a little while and go inside. So it's going to be both. That's what I find. And in the classes I teach, they're different every week for that reason, that we do need to be still building physical strength, as the container for, the inner quality of strength, the sense of that we can rely on our energy, that we can rely on ourselves. We need to be building that strength. We need to be still creating like a fit, causing so much overload. Yeah, absolutely. So how do we do that, right? How do we deal with that? So again, I think it's this combination of movement with rest. But for me, and you guys listening, you can chime in as well. For me, being in nature has been the thing that, in addition to my practices, and I do consider my walking in nature a practice of renewal, because it's, again, coming back to, so much energy, coming back to, we have this notion in yoga, It's a Sanskrit word called sat, S-A-T, and it refers to the unchanging truth, like that which is true at all times in all places, like that which never changes. And one way I think about that is like if you've ever looked at a picture of yourself as a baby or a young person, you know, you kind of look at that person and there's something in that photo that's still there within you, right? Even though everything else has changed, there's something that hasn't changed, right? There's an essence that hasn't changed. And so that's one way we can experience this idea of sat in yoga. It's the unchanging underlying ground of our being. And that's what we need to come back. That's what nature allows us to come back to, right? If we think over the last 6 months, like in our lives, while so much has changed, like what hasn't changed, right? Nature, in some ways, where I live, nature is thriving, actually. So that is going on while everything else is going on.
Yeah.
The people that I love, you know, the my loved ones and my connection with my loved ones hasn't changed. And so, and my breath, you know, my body's changing all the time, but you know, my feet on the ground, my breath, you know, what are the things that we can hold on to when everything else is changing? You know, this is what yoga is about. It's how do we live in times of crisis? That's why I taught a whole course in the spring about the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita and the guidance there for navigating times of crisis is invaluable, and it's completely pertinent to what we're living through. So I think those of us who have a yoga practice, one thing that's become clear is there's really nowhere else we need to look for the clarity we need right now, because it's there in what we've been studying. It's there in what we've been practicing. It's there if we're teachers in what we've been teaching others. We just need to go back to what we already know and remember that, like on a daily basis. And so the idea, like I love that your spirit team said, you know, focus on your practices, because that is what you have domain over. And I'm grateful. I mean, these past few months, I've been so grateful that I come from a pretty rigorous tradition, that there has been a sense of a value on discipline and regularity of practice that is not so fashionable in the mainstream yoga world. You know, like I sometimes joke, like the idea that yoga is a path, you know, the abhyasa that you will have to practice steadily over a long period of time, consistently, to experience the benefits. I joke with my students, like that's not a big selling point of the practice in the marketplace, that you're going to have to keep showing up, you know, little by little. That's how transformation happens. But, you know, at times like this, I'm so grateful for that, that I have made friends with discipline because that I think that kind of regularity, being able to be regular in what I do, that I consider yoga, which, you know, is different every day. It's not that has to be the same. It's not rigid, but that sense of regularity, I think has been a saving grace over the past few months. So
I love what you're saying about making friends with discipline. Because it's interesting because Cairo said last week, he talked about making friends with fear and all of fear's friends, which are anxiety and anger and all these things. But I think I've talked about this before, but back in 2011, it would have been, and I went through like a health crisis, and I really had to become highly disciplined in my eating and my exercise and my spiritual practice and everything in order to heal. And I found I had this Tao tarot deck, and I've talked about it so much this month. I feel like I need to go back and order it because I gave it away years ago, but it was this Tao oracle or whatever. And there was a card for discipline on there, and it had the I Ching for discipline. And it was this little picture of a martial artist. And I put it on my puja. I had it on my puja for, I don't know, probably 5 years. to remind me to have that discipline. And like you're saying, it's the work every single day that gets you to a place of transformation. And I'm so grateful for my practices also. And even more, like when I look back and gain perspective, so thankful. And I know there's a lot of you guys listening in the community that are the same way. We've been doing this work for years and years and years. And thank God I was doing that inner work and purifying my own stuff, because now we're being bombarded with everyone's stuff, and being able to identify what is baggage and what isn't is a big part of that practice too. I love what you're talking about, that being able, what hasn't changed, what's that inherent truth within yourself, and being able to gain perspective on that. I visualize often when I meditate that image of Shiva up on the mountain. And when you're up on the mountain sitting and you look out across all the land, you have a perspective, and that perspective brings you back to our inherent truth, which is we are God's source. And that all of this other stuff is just source experiencing itself in all these different ways. And it's more important now than ever, I think, to understand that, to kind of not just intellectually, but to integrate that teaching into your being, that you are source behind you looking out at all of this stuff. And it really does diffuse whatever you're feeling, those destructive emotions that come up when you're experiencing what's going on out in the world. Because I'm even having anxiety, like going out of my house now. I mean, really, this year has created that kind of energy, and I have to stay. You talk about breathing, like I have to stay in my breath practice to go to the grocery store, to be out. It's not the same as it was. And it's, for me, it's like I feel the grief that everyone's feeling. I feel my own grief. Like there's a nostalgia of like, oh, remember, I mean, they're starting to put up Christmas stuff in the stores, and it's like, well, what's going to be real for us? Like what's really happening here? And so that sitting in your truth, looking at what is unmovable, I mean, gosh, it's just so important right now.
Yeah. And I think one of the reasons it's important, I love that image of like looking from the mountaintop. I use that a lot too, because, I mean, of course, that is the witness consciousness, the witness state that we cultivate in yoga practice is just that, right? It's how do we move ourselves into that awareness that holds everything and yet remains unaffected. It's like, how do we move ourselves into that place? Because it's from that place, I think, where we get clarity, even if it's just the clarity on how am I going to make it to the store today?
Yeah.
Right? How am I going to make it out of my house today? How am I going to feed my family today? I mean, we need to right now be using our practices to connect us, to step forward to be responsible human beings, I think.
Yeah.
Ultimately, whatever that means for everyone's situation looks a little bit differently. So I don't want us to get caught up in just that. We need to have that spacious perspective every day. We need to come back to that unchanging sense of being. And that is meant, I think, right now to serve how we step forward as responsible human beings, as strong human beings, as clear human beings, as people who are for me, it's about stepping forward in service. How can I serve, whether it's my family or my students, or, how does that, the idea of dharma, what do I do to uphold the roles and responsibilities in my life? And so for me, it's not, even though it can sound kind of grandiose, to get that big perspective, for me, it really is in the service of just living responsibly and with compassion for myself and others, because it's without that, without that spacious perspective, we don't get the opportunity to self-reflect, like you're saying, we were talking before we went on about, just the whole focus on self-reflection and inquiry in yoga is that's how we grow and that's how we learn. And so we want to do it in a way that we can bring that understanding to bear on how we're living our lives right now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. And being willing to look at it. You know, my affirmation this whole month has been, what am I denying? What am I ignoring? What am I denying? What am I pushing aside? Because that is ultimately where my work is still. And I think being willing to ask yourself those questions, being willing to take the actions, you know, being willing to look at what's coming up for you, because that's the hard part. You can feel angry or frustrated or upset or sad or whatever feeling you're feeling when something is brought to your attention, whether it's a politician or a friend or a parent or whatever. But you have to be willing to look at it, like you're saying, like having that self-inquiry.
Yeah.
Well, what does this really mean for me, rather than reacting? Because the reactions are ultimately what are causing some of the destructive energies on the planet right now. So how do you become willing to sit and listen? Right?
Yeah. Yeah. One of the understandings that has been really helping me recently is, you know, in yoga, we have an understanding of the mind, what we would think of as the mind in the Western sense. It's really three different things. In classical yoga or Sankhya philosophy, it's manas, it's the sensory perception is one faculty. Just kind of how our senses take things in, how we perceive things. And then the second is what's called in yoga the ego, the ahankara, which literally means the I maker. It means so we take in things through our sense perception, but then we ascribe them to ourselves in terms of the ego in yoga is seen as like our personality, our preferences, our likes, our dislikes, anything that we use to define ourselves. I'm a teacher. I like this. I live here. You know, anything that describes ourselves as individuals is the ego. But then beyond that, there's what's called the buddhi, which is the intellect, which is the facility, the part of the mind or the mental facility of discernment and intuition and intellect, where we actually can take what we perceive through the senses to a more refined level. So it's been very helpful for me to understand that the way I react and the way that I take things in, that is all, when that's filtered through my ego, that is a distortion actually of what the truth is, right? And so if I can go back, you know, so in yoga, we understand that buddhi, that intellect is connected to our soul, really. It's connected to this bigger consciousness. So the more we can, and again, that mountaintop image is so useful because it helps us to see that, you know, here I am, this person, Barrie, living this life, taking certain things personally, having these judgments, having these preferences, having these likes and dislikes, but that is not the whole story. And so it has really helped me to not take things so personally, which has been very helpful over the past few months, to assert myself when I've needed to, not from a place of ego, but from a place of true, of what feels more true to me. So being just understanding that the mind and who we are, you know, that there's more than just the ego at work. It kind of it helps me. It has helped me to expand my perspective, and it gives me a choice. Right. It gives me a little bit more choice in how I respond and how I process things.
Mm-hmm. And that's so interesting to me because it's so similar, which I suppose is no coincidence. But when the Dalai Lama spoke in, this would have been a teaching in Long Beach, I don't know, 2014 maybe. But in his teaching, he was talking about the nature of reality and the mind, and you know, creating that clear light mind, which I think sounds very similar to the buddhi and what you're talking about. And his teaching was to cultivate that clear light mind. Like, you can chant and meditate all day long, but that doesn't do it. You also have to understand the science of the mind and the science of reality, and do your research and really understand how things work. And so it's interesting what you're saying, because when you put that all together, we have the ego filter of all these things. And when you come back into that perspective space and you're sitting on that mountaintop, one of those inquiry questions I think to ask ourselves is, what research have we done? What do we not understand that's creating those filters, creating the egoic mind, and really starting to pick apart what is truth with a capital T, and what don't we know, and being willing to admit that. I think Satyam talked about, what's a good yoga student? What's a student versus someone who's just a practitioner, being able to understand and learn and research. And I think we want to be students of our planet right now, and really understand our own being and our psyche and our minds. And the best way to do that is through that self-reflection piece, through meditation, and through the practices themselves. Because I know for me, I'm an alignment junkie also. And part of why I love it is because almost every day I learn something about my body. Because you have a body, but you don't actually really know that much about it. That's what I've learned. And so when you are looking at, well, where should my big toe be in relation to my hip? All of a sudden I'm like, oh man, like I have this whole other part of my body. I didn't even know I had a freckle there, or I didn't know that this was how the body works. Like, I'm not a science person. Like, so I think we have to approach our world right now and our views the same way we approach an alignment yoga practice, which is, well, like, I've asked questions, like I've sat there, because I'm not engaged, you guys, in this, all the political stuff. I'm just not. So I actually was like, well, how does this work? Like, why do we even have electoral votes? Like, I didn't know. I mean, that's the truth of it. Like, maybe I learned it in school, I don't know, but I didn't know, and I had to go look. And so, and I've approached that even with the Bible. I was raised Irish Catholic, and it was like, well, what does the Bible say about this? And you have to go look it up. And so I just think, much like we have to understand like how our hands should be placed in a downward dog, and how far, what does it mean to spread our fingers wide? What does it mean to grab with the first knuckle? Like, we also have to look at, well, what don't I know before I make this opinion, and where is my reaction coming from, and why is it coming from this place? And that goes with everything. I mean, you could apply that to anything in your life, really. And I think the learning and the research is really important as we go forward too. That keeps you in a place of being a student and being resourceful, and keeps you out of the reactionary space with everything that's going to happen, because it's not just about what's going on right now in the United States. It's about what's happening on the planet, what's happening to our oceans, what's happening to our trees, all sorts of things.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that is one way that practice is helping us. And then I think the other side of that is that can all get really overwhelming and confusing.
Yeah.
And again, as we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation, there's also a way I think we really just need to be coming back to ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think compassion is a huge part of this. It's like, this is, we were talking about discipline earlier, and the regularity of practice. And, it doesn't have to be like formal practice every day. But for me, the idea of just beginning again every morning, just a new, fresh start, that is like so liberating, right? And in my book, I have a whole chapter on studentship, because I think it's a huge benefit of yoga practice that, again, is not so often taught. Like, how do you engage with the practice as a student rather than a consumer? Like, how do you see yoga as a subject to be learned rather than a service to be consumed?
Yeah.
And we're getting back to that now, not not because it's bad to just like take a class and not think about it. Like that's totally fine. It's just that for people who are interested in inner evolution or using yoga as part of their path for personal development, there's a whole opportunity lost when we're not able to engage with it from that perspective that you said, with like, what can I learn? And asana, the beauty of asana is I was kind of making fun of alignment earlier, but I love alignment. And the reason I love it is because it's a way for me to put my mind into my body and to awaken consciousness in my body, which on the other side of that leaves me feeling so connected to, so steady, so grounded and centered. Is like unshakable, right? When your mind is, when you are really in your body. Right. We kind of say that's like kind of a term we use, but that's, it's really through the alignment technique that we start to focus the mind inside and awaken this incredible consciousness and intelligence that lives within the body. And that is where discernment comes from. That is where intuition, that's when we get clear access, right, to our intuition. That is when we're able to, like the other guest said, make friends with fear, which I love. Unless we're, like you said, we have this body and especially if we're more spiritual people, we might forget that, all our spiritual work is done, in this lifetime, at least it's done in this body. Like we need this body to fulfill our reason for being here.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's why asana in particular is so effective, because it bridges that gap between the body, which is temporary and always changing, and the spirit, which is unchanging. It's like, how do we bring those two together in service again to the present moment and to what we're living through?
So beautiful. You wrote like the most amazing. I was really moved by your most recent newsletter that you sent out about letting go. And I don't know.
Letting go. Yeah. Don't tell me how beautiful it is to let go. After this week, after I wrote that, the fall colors where I live are like beautiful right now. I mean, they're at their height. And so I spent a lot of time outside this weekend. And I thought I wrote this post called, let's face it, letting go is not always as beautiful as the autumn leaves make it out to be. I was just so sick of that meme, being bombarded on my social media feed with the autumn leaves are going to show us just how beautiful it is to let go. I was like, I just want to scream because it can be so uncomfortable and difficult. And so that was what I wrote about. But then I went out for a walk. I went walking this weekend, and it was so beautiful. And so I decided to just not compare my limited way of being able to let go. Not comparing that to the magnificence and the intelligence of nature and the perfection of nature. So I said, I'm just going to let the fall leaves speak for themselves, and I'm going to appreciate them just on their own terms. Like it doesn't have to be about me and my own process of letting go. And once I was able to do that, it was really wonderful. It was like this very freeing experience of like just experiencing again that perfection that's there. That I don't experience because of my own limitations, the ways I get caught up and not able to move with the flow all the time. So yeah, but now we're all being called to let go of things. I mean, who hasn't had to let go of any number of things over the past few months? It's like crazy what we've had to give up, right? In some ways.
Yeah, it is crazy. And yeah, I loved it because it was so timely because of what's happening in our world. But, there's letting go of the story, that's probably harder for me. I'm a Scorpio, so we tend to just get rid of stuff. I think as a Scorpio personality, it's like, bye, see you later kind of thing. but cleaning out my closet is a very different thing than letting go of stories and patterns. And it just reminds me, you're talking about the leaves and letting go. And part of why I really loved what you wrote was because it arrived the day after I went and visited my grandmother, who is 97, and she's in a home and she has dementia. And she's 97, she's still walking all around, but she doesn't remember anything. And we sat with her, my dad and I, the day before you sent that post, and just sat with her, and unfortunately with the restrictions, we could only be there a short time. But in that time, she can really only hold on to a thought for a few seconds. So she kept pointing to the leaves and how they were changing color. And then she'd say, "Do you see all these leaves?" And then she'd stop for a minute and she'd say, "Oh, do you see all these leaves?" And it was a tough thing to hold space for her. But at the same time, I thought, it's a really beautiful reminder to be in the present moment and to let go of what's next. Because it doesn't really matter what's next. What matters is being present in that very moment. And just like you're saying, you go on that walk and you see those trees, and it's just a beautiful thing when you can just sit and take in nature. And that's something that she still has. And I think that's something that all of us still have, is to be able to see this place that we came to be. And so, yeah, it just was a really meaningful writing that you did for me in so many ways, and important for all of us. Because like you said, we're all letting go of things right now, and we're going to be asked. It's a call to action right now. And this is a catalyst for awakening. So it's all about accepting the invitation that we've been given. And if you miss it, it's going to be an unfortunate loss. It's really important to say, well, what is this pushing me to do today?
Mm-hmm.
And I really want to get into some of your classes and support, because I feel like that's really important, and part of why you're here today, of course, and why I asked you to do this month. I signed up for your classes. I'm excited about it. But what are your intentions? I know as a yoga teacher, like, we come up with all our little themes and ideas and things we want to do. And so going into this final quarter of 2020, like, what are you focusing on as an instructor and as a leader on your platform? Like, what are you thinking of doing?
Yeah. I don't think too far in advance is one thing. Like, I don't create content for, weeks and weeks in advance. I do it just a couple weeks in advance. And I often ask, I have students from all over the world. And so I'll ask them, every few weeks, like, I'm planning next month's content. What would you like to see? So some of it is, it's responding to the needs that I hear, but a lot of it actually is just me kind of tuning into, what I think. I have, so among my subscribers, I kind of hold everybody in in my awareness, and so I go with what I feel like our community needs. But what I'm doing with my weekly classes, that's new, is before each asana practice, I'm doing a short talk that's based on a theme of yogic life or a principle of yogic living. Because for me, what's really important is, as we've been talking about, giving people ways to go beyond the physical part of their practice, to deepen the physical and to refine the physical, but to also take their practice beyond the physical and to be able to incorporate some of the ideas of yogic living into their lives. So I give a short centering talk, and then I go into the asana class. And so sometimes they're form-based classes and also flow classes. There's a big variety. And now I have now I have like over 100 classes on the platform. So they're organized by classes of poses. So you'll find twists, you'll find hip work, you'll find inversions, back bends. There's short classes, there's longer classes, there's 20-minute practices, there's 75-minute classes. So there's a big variety. But what I've been focusing on lately is, I recently did a 2-part strength building series called The Mighty Yogi, where we focus on lower body strength and upper body strength, but also the internal strength. Strength is, the force of our own power, the force that helps us rely on ourselves. That strength is stable and steady. So it's always bridging the physical with the more spiritual. That's really what my classes are about. So they're really for people who are interested in yoga philosophy, even though that's a big word because it's a practical living philosophy. And so I do a whole variety of things. Like I taught a class recently on eagle pose, where it was a deconstructed sequencing strategy where we look at some of the component parts of a particular pose, and then we explore them, then we put them back together. So I have a bunch of classes like that. But recently we did eagle pose, which in Sanskrit is Garudasana, and Garuda is a mythical bird, actually, that's the vehicle of Lord Vishnu, and he symbolizes, just complete, steady, devoted support. And so in the talk, I talk about the iconography and the symbolism of the Garuda, but then there's also a reflective component where I give questions, to contemplate, like, what does it feel like when someone has your back? Like, what is that support? And how does your practice allow you to be that support to others? So I give in the platform, I do a transcript of the talk and the reflection questions. So there's a lot of tools on different levels for students to work with, and also for teachers to take into their classes. A lot of my students are teachers and lead their own small communities. So I really want to support them in being able to, again, deliver not just the physical practice now, but the deeper connection to themselves that I think we all need. So those are my weekly classes, and it's really exciting because I had a monthly membership for a while, and I really got the message in 2020 that we needed to simplify. Like, people just need something easy to be part of. And so having it with the weekly class, having just a weekly class subscription makes it really easy. And so people have been loving it.
Yeah.
And I deliver them every Saturday morning.
Okay.
So they're pre-recorded, so you don't have to make anything live, which I also think, even though there is definitely a place and a benefit to doing classes on Zoom, there's also, I think, a lot of freedom in not having to show up at a particular time, or, adjust your camera, or, have to deal with connection problems. So there's just a lot of freedom in terms of the offering. Yeah, simple is definitely the way. Having a clear vision of what 2020 is all about. Yeah, Michelle, I want to hear from you too. I'm going to watch you later this week. Yeah, and so I actually would also love to, I talk about yoga as a path of the mundane and the mystical. That for me, it's really both. That there is the physicality of the practice. There's the things we do that are just clear and concrete. But then there's always, yoga has always at its heart been a mystical practice, right? There's a little bit beyond our understanding and our explaining. So when you share things about the Schumann resonance, which was new for me, actually, I learned what that was from you. It's really helpful for me as a practitioner to understand a little bit more about, get another angle of insight into what's going on.
Yeah. Well, everything you're saying is part of why I love you so much and why I feel so aligned with you. I mean, really, I agree with the simplified. I think I have more complexity than I could ever need with my practices and being live on this show and all these things. And so I've been doing that exact inquiry, is like, how do I simplify and still provide the support on my platforms in 2021, as I look forward. And so I'm with you on there's a time and place for lives, and this show will continue to be live, but there's also a time and place for other things to be recorded. And it's nice because you can go back and access it. And so I just signed up for your classes, so I'm brand new to all of it, but I'm really excited about it because it has been challenging. It's not in alignment with me to go to a studio right now with the restrictions. It's just not for me. And I have a pretty solid home practice. So I'm excited for your classes. So for those of you who do practice yoga and do have a home practice. I mean, what I'm looking forward to is what you're talking about, which is all of the tools and resources that come with that. The inquiry piece is really important, and being able to really move my body is important too, and especially because I sit in this office at this desk, and so I actually have my yoga mat in front of me in this little room, so that I can start moving in between clients and calls and all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really important.
I started your book and got through the beginning, and of course then it's been a wild world, but I'm also excited about that because I think whether you're new to the practice or whether you have I've been practicing yoga about 20 years, and so that's my inner work book for December. I'm taking a lot of December off for everybody who's listening, so we only have like 2
Good for you.
Yes, I'm taking the end of the year off, and your book is on my list as one of the things that's going to be on my mat with my light on light.
Oh, thank you. And bravo to you for having a home practice, because it's not so easy to do these days. I know. I mean, I'm also someone who I'm grateful that I've never had a big resistance to just being on my own and practicing. But it has gotten harder lately with all the distraction and just the difficulty, I think, collectively, to be able to focus. But I have found over the past 6 months, one of the positive changes that have come out of our situation for yoga students is that a lot of people have started a home practice where there was no need for them to do it before, because they could just go to a studio and it's a lot easier often to leave your house and just go somewhere else. Mm-hmm. But people are also experiencing that when you're on your mat with no one else telling you what to do, that's when you really get to do what you want. You get to really make the practice work for you. You get to know your body in a way that's just really impossible, I think, when you're mat to mat with other people. I mean, there is great benefit to doing yoga in community and in groups. I'm not saying that, but just to say, I think the value of home solo practice is really important. So that's why I also have a free guide to home practice that you can download from my site, where I give sequences. So if you don't want to practice with a screen or to supplement the screen practices, on my platform, I also write down the sequences. So you can download the PDFs of the sequences. So they are a support for people's home practice. So you can do it with the video, you can just listen to the audio, you can do it with the written sequence. So it's definitely meant to support your home independent practice and supplement that.
Oh, that's awesome. So yeah, go to Barrie's website. It's coming across the screen, but it's also in the show notes. I didn't know you had that free guide. I'm totally going to go download that.
Yeah, and we have also on each class, we have a Q&A and comments forum. Okay. So I'm always on there, so you can share how it went, you can ask questions. So that's for every class we have. So it's really great. It's a really great platform and super easy to use. And there's an index of all the classes. And I love creating the classes. And I also, like I said, I have in mind all the people like you, the practitioners, longtime practitioners who receive them. And again, it's this spirit of love and studentship, right? Just love for the practice. And again, like knowing that you have all the tool, like, the practices that will support you. It's like we have the tools, we have the understanding. And so how do we just have a little support to go back to that, stay connected to that, right? At a moment when we need it.
Yep, totally agree.
I love my yoga. Awesome.
I love it too. I also love Danny saying I'll get to catch up your videos in December.
Yeah, great. Awesome. Awesome.
Oh gosh. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to dive in. And part of why you're here is because I just value your philosophy, because I was never interested in pushing through a power vinyasa at 6 a.m. I found yoga to heal my body and really found that it had this beautiful integration of the spiritual piece. And when you are bombarded with so much information, and this is prior to this information age. I mean, even in my 20s, when I first started yoga, I was 25. And, I started because I was just so darn empathic, and this energy was sitting in my body. And I was finding I went to the Berkeley Psychic Institute's clairvoyant program. And in that program, and I guess I've never really talked about it this way, but in that program, part of what they teach you is how to read and clear your own energy. And I found I just had all this stuck energy, and it was really difficult to move out. And when I went to my first, it was a gentle yoga class. I think the whole thing was on the floor. I don't even think you stood up. And when I first went to that class, I noticed at the end of the class when we were in Shavasana, I was like, well, shoot, like I moved a bunch of this energy out. I felt more clear than I'd ever felt. And that was really my introduction to yoga. And so I'm really excited about what you offer, because the depth of the inquiry and the alignment piece and all of that is really, really valuable to me, and hopefully valuable to a lot of people who are watching right now or listening later on the audio or wherever you are that you find this, because that depth is why we practice yoga, in my opinion. And honestly, why we want to practice it now. I mean, I think there's more reason to go deeper into the practice now than there ever has been. And that goes all the way back to the beginning of our conversation. It's a great segue to the completion of it, which is it's time to find ways to support yourself and to stay balanced during this time. And being able to look at yourself, to gain perspective on who you are, where you are in the world, feel your body, feel nature. Like that's what the practice is for. And by gosh, that's what we need right now.
And I'll just add to everything you said, like you said, to move energy. Like we need to move energy. That is, part of what happens in every yoga class, whether you have a philosophical theme or not, right? You're moving energy, right? So just the fact that it is a modality that there's many different ways the yoga tradition envisions the human being. There's many different models of who we are according to yoga, but what they have in common is that we are this series of interpenetrating layers from gross to subtle, that we are more than the physical body. We're also more than the emotional body, the mental body. We have all those bodies. And so moving energy is a very real thing. And we need to do that right now. And so, so it gives us this full spectrum of practices to really suit us in whatever way we need. And those of us who are more sensitive and are more empathic, it's like if we're in touch with that intuition of how we need to move and what we need to restore ourselves, there is such a wonderful variety of practices in yoga that are available to us.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to add on to that, remember that our physical body is the conduit for our planet. And when your feet are on the earth, you're receiving all the energy she is working on releasing. And you're also receiving everything through your head from God's source that's going into the earth. So moving energy right now as our planet, as a sentient being itself, is rising in consciousness is the most important thing we can do, because in your yoga practice, you're purifying the earth's energy through your feet, and you're bringing God's source directly to her through your head.
Oh my God, that is so beautiful. By the way, I have a whole chakra series on the platform too that you might love. It was a whole course I did that's now on the platform, where there's writings, there's inquiry. But it also reminded me, when you were talking about that, the presentation I did for the last summit about the elements of nature in the body, we did a little exercise around that.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm going to make a note, and what I'll do is I'll send the link out to you guys in the community on the newsletter.
Oh, great. Yeah. Because that really goes into how yoga envisions the way that the energies of nature exist within the body. And I'm also working on a class. You asked me what my focus is for the rest of the year. And that is a big part of it, is I feel like through the asana practice, getting the energy of the sun, the inspiration of the sun, the moon, the 5 elements, but also just all of nature. There's so much there in terms of the elemental awareness in the body. So I really want to explore that again as a way of bringing us all back to that sense of unchanging. Yeah, the mountaintop sounds lovely. Yeah,
Kiva on the mountain. Sure. I might have to put that on my screensaver because it really does stick with me like that. Whenever Julie Hoyle talks about, being source itself, like whatever's behind, I always think of that. And that's what I do. And I think I talked about this last week with Deborah Katz and Sue on the Clairvoyant podcast. Is there was this psychic circle board. It's like a Ouija board, but I can't use a Ouija board because of the negative energy with it. But this psychic circle board's like really joyful and cheery. It's got all these pictures. One of the pictures it has is a hot air balloon. And the message of the hot air balloon was about rising above and gaining perspective. And so I often do that visualization too. Like I imagine I'm in a hot air balloon. And if I go up and honestly, I mean, to get real technical, this is how I do a lot of my remote viewing on the planet. So if I'm looking at like earthquakes or what's going on, I actually rise up in my balloon and then I go look around and I see what's going on the planet. But those kinds of the mountaintop and the hot air balloon, like it's more important now than ever because all of us can get caught up in the narratives that are being spun all over the place. And a lot of us don't even know what's happening. I mean, I've started in my daily life, like watching world news, alternative news, we've got to look around. And so I'm looking around in my spiritual practice as much as I'm looking around in my daily life, because I think it's important for us to gain perspective ultimately. I was going to ask you, I have this book. So December is kind of my quiet time. It's like the shadow, it's the darkness in winter and stuff here where I live. And so, it's really a time every year I'm very disciplined about planning, like, what am I going to do in that time frame to like really kind of bring myself back and to gain perspective in my own way. And so your book's one of those things because the self-inquiry and the chapters, I read the whole book, but then you really have to go back and do the activities. And that's what I want to do is like dig into that. And the other book that I have on my list, because you brought up the chakra piece. So now I got to go watch your chakra. There's this chakra book and I'm trying to find it right now because it's in my library. And I'm curious if you've read it. It is called, is this it? Okay, let's see. It's called Eastern Body, Western Mind. Let me go to the cover here.
Yeah, so that's one of Anodia Judith's books.
Yeah, Eastern Body, Western Mind, Psychology and the Chakra System. So you do know that book. So that's one of the books I want to read this winter.
Yeah, and actually she has another book out, which I love, and I especially love the title. It's called Waking the Global Heart, Moving from the Love of Power to the Power of Love.
Oh, I love
And it was the book she wrote after that one. Okay. But she's great. I mean, she's really the authority, the authoritative voice on the melding of the chakra system with Western psychology. She really teaches a lot about that. So she's definitely someone to look into.
Oh, cool.
If you want to learn more about the chakras.
Yeah, her book and your book. That's my
awesome. Thank you. Thank you. And also that reminds me is that on my website, another freebie that you can sign up for is the Evolving Your Yoga bonus content.
Oh, okay.
So I have guided visualizations. I have pranayama exercises. I have, when I wrote the book for the 10 principles for enlightened practice, I actually wrote a whole separate workbook originally that had exercises for each principle, physical, breath-based, awareness-based practices. And then I realized, and journaling also. And then I realized that some of those would be better suited in an audio or video format rather than written, because, if you've ever tried to like read a visualization, it's like you have to kind of read it and then remember it and do it. So I recorded some of the exercises that we didn't publish. So that's right on the homepage of my site or the evolvingyouryoga.com page. You can sign up for the bonus content. You'll get access. There's pose tutorials there too that explain a little bit, that give a little bit more detail about how to practice the poses that are in the sequences.
Oh, that's awesome.
as well. So there's a bunch of stuff on there that you can sign up for.
I'm putting that up on the screen, and yeah, that's awesome. I'm totally doing that. And I think what I'll do, so for everybody who is watching and listening, if you're on my mailing list, I'll send out a little email here later today with the link to Barrie's presentation from the Sustainability Summit, because that one, I think you're right, that's so important right now. So that has some really great practices for you to connect to the elements. Yeah, get the bonus content. I'll have a reminder for the bonus content and also the free at-home practice guide, because that's, I mean, I don't know what I'd do if I couldn't practice at home. I probably would have gone crazy. And I haven't done it it's totally gone off the rails in the last 8 weeks for sure. But
yeah, that's okay.
I know, it's like,
that's okay. Start again.
Yeah, you know what's cool though is I did so much work at the beginning of the year for like between January and June, that I've noticed that some things are still very open and flexible. I was concerned that would shift. So I'm happy about that. And so, yeah, that and is all important stuff. So thank you so much for being on. I just love you.
Thank you for having me. I always love talking to you.
Me too. And I hope you'll be back next year. I can't believe it's already coming to the end of the year, but it is. It'll be here before we know it.
It'll be here before we know it. So thanks for having me on. I'd love to come back.
Yeah, I will love it too. We'll get that all figured out. And thank you to everybody who's watching, such a lovely audience. Thank you guys so much. And we'll be back. We actually have a special guest on here in 90 minutes. We have Alakananda coming on. Alakananda is an Ayurvedic doctor in Boulder, and she's really wonderful. She's actually who I go to, and her ashram in Boulder, and just an incredible healer and teacher and very wise. So I'm looking forward to having her on as well. So
awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much, Barrie. And thank you.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, everyone.
Have a great day.
Yeah.